In the frigid winter of 1959, 9 experienced Soviet hikers ventured into the northern Ural Mountains on what should have been a challenging but manageable expedition. But none of them returned home alive. They called it the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Welcome to History Unfolded. The group was made up of 8 men and 2 women from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by a 23-year-old radio engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. Before they even got started, one of the members, Yuri Yudin, turned back early due to health concerns. He had no idea his poor health saved his life. The rest of the group continued towards their destination, a mountain called Otorten, which lay about 10 kilometers north of where they would meet their end. On February 1st, 1959, they set up camp on the slope of a mountain called Kolatsiakol, intending to continue their trek the very next day. That night, they wrote diary entries and took photographs, all of which show them in high spirits. It was the last time they saw one another alive. For nearly a whole month, their friends and family waited for them to come home. When the hikers failed to return, search parties were dispatched on February 20th. It took almost a week before they finally discovered the nightmarish scene. The group's tent stood partially collapsed and covered in snow on the mountainside. It had been cut open from the inside. Inside the abandoned tent lay all their belongings: shoes, clothing, food laid out for a meal, maps, and cameras. 9 sets of footprints led away from the tent, some of them showing bare feet, no shoes. Others showed just socks or a single shoe, but it seemed obvious that something had scared them enough to flee without proper clothing into temperatures around minus 40 degrees in a snowstorm with hurricane-force winds. Investigators followed those footprints to the edge of a nearby forest about 1.5 kilometers away. Near a large Siberian pine tree at the forest's edge, searchers found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivoneshenko. They had no shoes and no clothes other than their underwear. Branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had climbed it, possibly to look for something in the distance. Between their frozen corpses lay the remains of a small fire, as though they tried to warm themselves up shortly before they died. But when they looked closer, investigators discovered that Doroshenko's ear, lips, and nose were covered in blood, and that Krivoneshenko had bitten off a piece of his own knuckle, perhaps to stay awake or to stifle a noise. Either way, his body showed signs of 3rd-degree burns that couldn't have happened if he'd simply fallen asleep. 3 more bodies were found between the pine tree and the tent at increasingly wide distances from the tree. These were Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Their positions suggested they were attempting to crawl back to the tent when death finally claimed them. Dyatlov was found with his clenched fists raised, jacket open, vomiting blood. Kolmogorova had a strange baton-shaped bruise on her waist. But Slobodin had a significant crack in his skull. Now, let's be clear, this wasn't from clumsiness or disorientation. They were in the middle of nowhere. The evidence suggests someone had struck him in the head. But who and why? Nobody knows. It took another 2 months before the remaining 4 bodies were discovered, buried under several meters of snow in a ravine 70 meters from the pine tree. However, these bodies changed the entire course of the investigation. The first body's injuries defied all explanation. Her eyes were missing, her tongue was gone, parts of her lips, facial tissue, and a fragment of her skull were just not there. The autopsy officially noted an open wound on the body, a large blood loss and neck trauma. Her head was found lying on a natural ledge with water pouring over it, her mouth open where her tongue should have been. The second body had suffered a brutal blow to his skull. The third and fourth had severe chest trauma, their rib cages crushed with a force comparable to that of a car crash. Yet their skin remained unbroken with no external wounds. It made no sense. When the bodies were returned to Russia for investigation, some of the victims' clothes showed traces of radioactivity. Their skin had turned a strange orange hue, and their hair had gone grey, which may well be signs of radiation, but they could also be the result of months of exposure to the elements. You be the judge. However, the Soviet criminal investigation concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths, which is a fancy way of saying, yeah, we don't know either. The case files were classified and hidden away until the 1970s, fueling decades of speculation. What exactly could have driven 9 experienced mountaineers to slash their tent from the inside and flee barefoot into a lethal snowstorm? Why would they choose certain death in the freezing darkness over whatever threat they perceived inside their tent? Theories have just grown and grown for decades. Some blame an avalanche, though let's be frank, the slope was not steep enough by typical avalanche standards to justify that idea. Others point to secret Soviet military tests, noting reports of strange glowing orbs in the sky that night and the inexplicable radioactivity on the clothing. In 2020, Russian prosecutors announced that an avalanche had been the official cause of death, something Swiss researchers later supported, suggesting a rare slab avalanche that created no typical avalanche signs and disappeared quickly under fresh snowfall. They proposed that after the avalanche, the hikers' expertise in mountain safety ironically doomed them. They followed textbook evacuation procedures for an avalanche threat but couldn't survive the brutal conditions. Well, okay, but that doesn't explain anything. How does an avalanche lead to a missing tongue and eyes, the devastating internal injuries with little external trauma, the radiation, and the strange behavior of cutting open their only shelter rather than simply exiting through the entrance? 6 decades later, the 9 bodies found scattered across the snowy slopes of Dead Mountain still remain a total mystery. Whatever happened that night on February 1959 took 9 lives and left behind one of the most disturbing mysteries of the modern age, the Dyatlov Pass incident. Thank you for watching. If you have any theories on what happened up on that mountain, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until then, if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe, and we'll see you for the next great mystery on History Unfolded.